Thank you. Good evening. It's so delightful to be spending this gorgeous day with you all. And as you're about to watch the incredible Strife, written by Matt MacKenzie and of course directed by Yvette, I've printed off their bios just to make sure that I do the great justice of actually speaking about all the accomplishments that they've had over their incredible artistic careers. Matt MacKenzie, in brief, is one of my favorite playwrights. I grew up in theater school studying Matt's work and then graduated into the world admiring and being a longtime fan of your work, Matt. But Matt MacKenzie is a playwright based in Edmonton. You might remember some of his other works, First Métis Man of Odessa, which was at 𝗦𝗁𝗶𝗲 2 years ago?
Yep.
2 years ago, and is about to have a remount in Theatre Calgary this upcoming fall. He is the artistic director of Punctuate Theatre as well, and he studied playwriting at the National Theatre School of Canada. He launched Pyretic Productions back in 2008 and staged many productions in Edmonton. He had his first play premiere in Toronto with Sia at Factory Theatre in 2012. And as Matt, you began exploring your identity as a Métis man, led to Bears in 2015, which won the Dora Award for Best New Play that season. And of course, Métis Man of Odessa won a second Dora for Best New Play. The First Métis Man of Odessa in particular tells of the true story of his meeting with his wife and Ukrainian actress powerhouse Maria 𝗦𝗁𝗲𝗲, and it premiered here in Toronto at the Theatre Centre in 2023, went on tour through to Edmonton, Vancouver, Saskatoon, and Winnipeg. And along with his incredible work as a playwright and artistic director, he is also a member of faculty as an assistant professor of dramatic arts at Brock University. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you.
And then Yvette Nolan, no stranger to Tarragon. You might remember Yvette from Three Fingers Back, also 2 seasons ago now.
Yeah.
And Yvette Nolan is another person that I looked up to greatly and also studied back at theater school. I remember being around Factory, working with Meehan on supporting the unplugging, and Yvette Nolan is a playwright, director, dramaturg, and was the artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts from 2003 until 2011. She was one of 10 writers on Gabriel Dumont's Wild West show, and as a playwright, she has written Annie Mae's Movement, The Unplugging, The Birds, the dance opera Bearing, a libretto, the short play for film Catharsis, among other works. And Yvette is also the author of 2 books, Medicine Shows, published in 2015, and Performing Indigeneity in 2016. Are you still working towards your master's in public policy?
No, I've got my master's. Yes, I do.
In the Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy.
Correct.
Congratulations,
Thank
Yvette.
you.
Oh, just hit my mic, sorry. Welcome both.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for bringing Strife to Tarragon. I wrote down some questions that I researched upon some interviews from both of your works across these many decades. And just to start us off, I wanted to talk about the nuance that you were speaking about and exploring in this play. In the desire, could you share some of the experiences of discovering or realizing the gray areas of nuance while you were unpacking this monolithic identity, or the shattering of a monolithic identity?
Yeah, sure. I think, so I'm from Alberta, and the play is set in Alberta. And I think that a lot of Indigenous folks work in the oil patch, which is sometimes news to folks in other parts of the country. And at times in the media and in discourse, even in theater, it seems sometimes that Indigenous folks are sort of talked about as a monolith, that we're all climate activists, we're all land protectors, water protectors, and many Indigenous folks are, but it feels that sometimes it's as if those are the good Indigenous, or those are the real Indigenous folks, whereas folks who work in industry or who aren't perceive themselves to be political in any way are seen as less Indigenous or not good Indigenous. And so I wanted to kind of look at characters from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different lived experiences, and kind of put them all together in a bit of a pressure cooker situation, just to try to look at where people stand or where they think they stand and where they might end up when push comes to shove. And I think that what's been interesting about hearing responses to Strife is that people, people aren't siding with one character right from the get-go and just sort of stuck with that, and but that they'll be with someone or agreeing with someone at some point, and then they'll shift and be like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm still with that way of thinking, and they'll be kind of aligning with someone who they never would have at the beginning of the play thought they'd align with on certain things. So I think that hopefully that compelling characters are like compelling people, where they're not, you couldn't just Google their politics and immediately have a printout of everything that they stand for and they believe in and they donate to, because that's so dull.
Exactly. And I was curious, in your writing of it, Matt, you spoke about in another interview how some of these characters were folks that you knew out in the world, or different parts of yourself in history, from being a contractor to now being in academia. Could you speak about how you curated these specific personalities into this pressure cooker?
Yeah, I think there's a character who works in industry, and I never worked directly in the patch, but I worked as a contractor in Alberta as a house painter for 15 years. And so that kind of blue collar kind of feel, I think it feels like it's very, I recognize it and I enjoy it in some ways. And I met a lot of folks who maybe weren't university educated, who made a lot more money than me. It's still kind of amazing the amount of money some people can make who might not even have their high school education in the patch. And sometimes people poo-poo that, but in other ways, if you've had a difficult upbringing, or you're a character who's lost family or doesn't have community support, that's a remarkable thing. That's like winning the lottery. And so I think that there's that, and then I'm in academia now, and that's been a whole interesting world to see how things are talked about. What's said and then what's done are two so totally different things in academia, to a wild degree. Like, could write a series of plays on that, and I'm just early going with that. So I think but that's quite fascinating, because there's a lot of, I think, connection between how indigeneity, our identity, can be somewhat commodified in theater, and that can be done in academia too. And you have people, rightly or wrongly, who are taking up space or speaking on behalf of many, because they've been put in positions of power, who sometimes it's not people from that community who put them in those positions. Right. So it's a kind of a sometimes an awkward place to live, wherein you're speaking on behalf of a community that you haven't actually been hired by, or put up by. So there's that element, and then I guess my sister, she's a big time activist, and she's I don't think, sometimes people might not regard or think that there's people that far left in Alberta, but there are, and she's definitely one of them. And so just to show that Alberta itself isn't sort of a political monolith as it's sometimes kind of shown in the rest of the country. Yeah,
thank you so much, Matt. And similarly, Yvette, I know that in your body of work and across the different hats that you've worn in the theater, you've also acknowledged and or explored these identities of grayness, or the complexities of contradiction in identity. Could you speak a little bit about how that lent itself to directing this production?
Yeah, I wasn't sure I wanted to direct another Indigenous play, because it's always hard. The work is hard, the content is hard, it's challenging, but Matt's script is so nuanced, you use the word, and what I saw in it is like all of these different Indigenous folks, everyone in the play, all the characters are Indigenous, and they all have different points of view, and they're all related to each other in one way or another. And it's kind of like the world writ small. Like it's about this particular family in this particular industry in this particular town, but the way we're grappling with identity politics right now in Canada, it's exactly the same story. And it's like, who do we believe to be an authority in terms of Indigenous worldview or Indigenous practice or Indigenous, you're talking about Indigenous academics being hired on at a university, likely not by an Indigenous community, but by an academic community, which is not Indigenous. And right away you start to see how complicated it is, who we give the power to hold the knowledge. And that is a big question inside of Strife, like who has what knowledge and where did we get those teachings? I have grappled with it a lot in all of the work, including the unplugging, because my mother was Algonquin from Quebec. She went to residential school in Ontario. She married my father, who was her math teacher. We ended up living in Saskatchewan, so that's where I was born. That's where my elders and my teachers mostly are from, and they're mostly Korean Métis, not Algonquin. And so I'm like some of the characters in Strife in that I get my teachings from the elders where I am. And one of my elders is like, learn the language where you are, Yvette. And so that goes for teachings as well. But then to be called out on what community do you belong to, and who names you as a knowledge keeper. And that's a question inside the play, but that's also a question inside the larger Canadian community. That's a question inside the academy. It's a question inside the larger arts community. It's something where all of us, Indigenous and Canadians, are grappling with, because we see these sort of outings all the time of pretendians or people hunting pretendians, and it's like
That's a good word.
It is a word that people use. It's like trying to take the power away from people who are speaking about Indigenous ways of being. And so that's a question inside Matt's play that was really intriguing to me and made me want to, grapple with it again on stage.
Thank you. One of the quotes that was from the program, from the director's note, but also in the interviews, was that, Yvette, you would say, all these things are true at once. And I wanted to ask maybe the story behind that in the rehearsal process, but also in in the exploration of this play, or both of you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like there's a movie called Rashomon by Kurosawa, where you see an incident, you see the all these points of view about the incident, and you don't know what's true, but maybe all of this is true at once, because when you see Strife, everybody holds these different opinions, and all of this is true at once. Like there's a word in Cree, 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏, that means, it's also an Anishinaabe-Moan. It means truth. But it's not an absolute truth. It means my truth. So my 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏 and your 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝗏 may be different from mine, but it's still truth. And that's the idea of truth. And therefore, how can my truth be more true than your truth? So all these things are true at once, which makes for a really complicated life. But I think we're all living a very complicated life.
Yeah, I think that as you'll see in the show, that at the beginning we see all the characters all on stage at once, and then it's such a great, I didn't even necessarily see that when I was writing. I don't see a lot when I'm writing, and so when I first saw a run, it kind of took my breath away, because I was like, well, that immediately visually shows us what I kind of get to eventually in the play, that everyone is Indigenous, but everyone looks totally different. Everyone is totally different, and I think that's exciting for me, that could live on stage, and maybe people don't know it because it's a digital program. People don't always go into it and might think that some folks aren't Indigenous, but I think that that's exciting for me, because we were talking with 𝗬𝗏𝗶𝗳𝗲 and 𝗦𝘁𝗿𝗄𝗏 in Lake Nipissing First Nation, where we brought up the show for a run, and he was talking about the importance of having sovereign conversations amongst Indigenous people, and he saw this play as one of those, where we talk about contentious issues, I know for them on the reserve, COVID and the lockdown was really contentious that they're still dealing with. And so he felt that there needs to be more conversations where there's Indigenous folks with different opinions having conversations about certain matters, not always kind of for with a settler interloper or middleman or gays or whatever you want in there. And so it was really great to hear him articulate what he'd seen.
Thank you. I was also curious how that line was used as a way of bringing the show in, like, as direction or as working with the cast. How did that become a part of the production itself?
Oh, for sure, because as Matt pointed out, you want to identify with a certain character, and because maybe they align with your values closely. And then you start hearing the other characters and you're like, oh yeah, maybe that's more like what I'm thinking. And then you start seeing how they're connected to each other. It's important because, like, one of the characters, Eddie, who works in the patch, who's quite, fierce about it, an Indigenous oil worker, says things that can be quite inflammatory, but I don't want the audience to hate him. And so to follow his journey through this grief, because the inciting incident is a death, and so he's dealing with grief like everyone in the play is, makes it so it's interesting to find, even me, and I've seen it 50 times now, flipping between who I actually feel aligned with most.
Thank you, Yvette. I'm so excited to chat with you next when we see you next at the next Tarragon Talk and see which character arcs did you follow. Talking around something that you already brought up, Yvette and Matt, one of the major themes of the play is the question around who gets to speak as an authority, as knowledge keepers, as you spoke about. Could you share a little bit about your journey with your knowledge keepers in the writing of this play? Because it's been 12 years of working on Strife, is that correct?
Yeah, I think I'm misrepresenting that a bit.
Okay.
I think because a lot of the play was written in the last 6 months, which Yvette can attest to. When I say, we're going to have it 12 years, Yvette's like, we didn't have a full play 4 months ago. So yeah, I think that I learned that with my play Bears. I think that I had internal mentors and leaders on that show, and we were speaking with elders when we were already deep into rehearsal, and I learned from that. I was like, this conversation should be happening at the inception of the idea, and it's a very different experience than working with other folks in theater, because other folks, you're kind of taught as a playwright at NTS that if you have an idea, that no one can say out that idea. Maybe no one will ever produce it or get terrible reviews, but ultimately, you keep that idea. And some things you bring forward to an elder, they'll say, no, you shouldn't put that on stage, or you shouldn't speak to that. You have no business speaking to that. And you have to be kind of prepared for that and not go elder shopping if you don't hear what you want to hear.
Right.
And I have two remarkable elders who I work with, Jerry and Joanne Saddleback, who were able to join us for opening and our community night. And Jerry Saddleback is a Cree teacher to Cree teachers. He's a remarkable guy, one of the most humble people I know. But when you see him amongst Cree people, you see how he's just revered. Like, the guy's met the king and he's met the pope, but you would never know. He's just so humble. And he gives us all this incredible cultural knowledge from a Cree perspective. And then Joanne Saddleback, she's Cree and she's Métis. Her dad was Stan Daniels, who's sort of like the JFK of the Métis. He wasn't killed, but a big deal in the politics of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And so she has that background and that knowledge. And so very fortunate to be able to talk with them about the plays. Yvette knows that Joanne even read for one of the parts in a workshop. Wow. And so it's a big part of my process now. But I learned that with very generous people being like, these were conversations you should have had much earlier, and we're going to help you have those conversations now, and not just rain hell down on your head for maybe misstepping, as they kind of very generously helped me find my way. And then with knowledge keepers, we worked with a number of different knowledge keepers. Right now we're working with someone named 𝗦𝗁𝗿𝗲, who's Métis, and she doesn't really like to be called a knowledge keeper. She likes to be called Métis Auntie at large. And when you come out of the theater that we're doing Strife in, there's a beautiful beadwork that she did, and she's a remarkable artist, has incredible knowledge. I think there's a museum, I've never been to it, where they have some of Louis Riel's hair in Winnipeg. Anyhow, she was kicked out of that museum and barred because she got angry at the settler staff for misrepresenting certain things and treating certain things in inappropriate ways. So yeah, I think very lucky to have encountered the people that I've encountered, and they form a big part of the conversations I have around the plays. And it's interesting because as someone who's learning about my culture and will be learning till the day I die, it's really important for me to be constantly speaking with people who know a lot more than me, and not to suddenly say, okay, well, I put in my time of talking to an elder for a couple of years, and now I'm going to speak with authority for whomever. So yeah.
Thank you, Matt. How about for you, Yvette?
I think it's interesting because you earlier referred to elder shopping, which a lot of people who are coming back to culture do, and they run around to elders and give them tobacco and ask them for counsel, and the elder says, well, you should do this. And then they go, okay, thanks. And then they go to another elder and they give them tobacco and they ask them the same question, and the elder goes, well, you should do this. And they go, thank you. That's not the way it works. Knowledge. And that's not the way your values and your knowledge and your teachings work. You acquire your elders, you find your elders or your knowledge keepers. My elders they don't call themselves elders, they call themselves the old ladies, or they call themselves the aunties, the knowledge keepers. So that generally is how I find my elders and knowledge keepers, is they won't identify as such. There's a line in Matt's play about like who gets to say who identifies a knowledge keeper, and the community does. And so I think it's really important because you can get lost in the same way that when we develop a new play, right, we can go from workshop to workshop to workshop to workshop for 10 years developing the play, and every time you get input you change it and you change it and you change it, and the play starts to lose its integrity. Well, it's kind of the same with your teachers and your teachings. You acquire them and you keep acquiring them because you're happy to be learning, but you can't give your power away. You have to at some point choose to write the play. You have to at some point choose what teachings you are going to stick to, because there's always going to be someone who's going to be unhappy with what you do or what you did, or not want to enter into the conversation but be willing to shake their finger at you and tell you how you've done it wrong. And that everybody's entitled to speak their piece, but as an artist I have to know why I'm doing it, what my values are, what place I'm working from, and how that aligns with what Matt's work is in this circumstance, his values, his teachers, his knowledge keepers, the play, and ultimately it is the play itself that is the thing that we're all serving. And all of that other stuff, all of the teachings, all of the support is there to support the work.
Wow. Thank you, Yvette. So it wasn't 12 years of development in terms of the writing of it. It was over the 6 months. But what you just alluded to was a question that I wrote down, which is, what are some of the learnings across each of the plays? Because you now have an incredible body of work, Matt. And in each of those cases, what have you learned along the way that you feel with Strife you may be picking at?
I love small theaters. I think I just love the intimacy of a small space, and I think that maybe that means that my work will never be commercially viable, right, and maybe that's something that's okay. That's I think that even though I'm living in Toronto now and have been for the last few years, my stuff is always based in Alberta for the most part, or seems to come back to Alberta, and I don't know if that will shift too much, because that's where the battles exist in my mind, still very much. And I think with Bears and After the Fire and now Strife they all feature characters. They're different plays, but they feature characters from the Patch. And I think I've come back to that so often is because it's sort of the one thing that gets in the news internationally all the time, is how Alberta is destroying the planet or fueling the planet, depending on your take. And so it's a big deal. It's a big deal in the people's lives who live in Alberta, and I think is what people associate with Alberta. So I've come back to that many times. But I think that I've kind of jumped back and forth between writing plays that are maybe a little bit less straight plays, like Strife and After the Fire, Bears, and a play I wrote last year, 𝗦𝗁𝗲𝗲. They're monologue plays that someone speaks in the third person, so I like to play with that and work with dancers. So I hope each of the plays is quite a bit different, because they felt a lot different.
Absolutely.
And it's weird to think of having a body of work still, to be honest.
In the show last year and in Bears as well, there is stunning choreography, and that was my next question. Is both of you have worked across mediums and across interdisciplinary forms and genre. What excites you about those interdisciplinary investigations alongside these thematic explorations?
When we first come to the city, my parents put me in ballet, piano, theater school, and books, like libraries. And I continued in ballet until I was like 14, and then I switched over to contemporary dance. And one of my first professional gigs was stage managing contemporary dance in Winnipeg for Ted Robinson. And I learned so much about dance. So dance is a big part of my body. It's showing up in my hips now at this age, but oh well. There's things we can say in dance that we don't necessarily say in text. I work in opera as well now. There's things we can say in opera that are too big for straight plays, whatever that means. I love that. I mean, the siloing of disciplines is kind of anti-Indigenous. Like, we always did all of those things, right? Marion Newman, the singer, the mezzo, who you may hear on Saturday afternoon at the opera, talks about this a lot because she does opera, but she talks about her big house where they always had masque and dance and story and song. All of those things were part of the culture. And so to split them up and only be like an actor doing text, is kind of antithetical to who we are. So I love the braiding of all those things back together, because it's how we tell story in the most effective way, because not everybody receives words the same way. So, and if you're bringing people into the theater who are not, maybe English is not their first language, maybe they're deaf, maybe there's all kinds of people who I want to come into the theater and be able to receive the work in a different way. And dance is very much, it's interesting, at Native Earth, when I was at Native Earth, the best reviewer of the Native Earth work, the least negative reviewer of Native Earth work, was a dance critic. Wow. Because she was receiving the work in a different way from everybody else who was like complaining that the play didn't have this structure, or it wasn't Aristotelian, or like it's not, because we're Indigenous and we're doing something different. Yeah. But the dance critic was the one who received it differently. Wow. Which was very, very informative for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that writing, I think that, like Yvette says, that dance can do things that words or theater can't. And I found that with Bears, I kind of actually, the last time I was at Tarragon was residency in 2011.
Right.
And I think it was like the end of that residency, I had kind of a nervous breakdown and got out of Toronto and went and moved to the mountains and kind of thought I was going to be done playwriting. And I started writing bears, not thinking it was a play or anything, but I would get to a certain point and it would be like Dance of the Chickadees and Dance of the Otters. And so it was, it just felt like it was just kind of coming out that they would tell the rest of the story. And I was lucky to work with 𝗦𝘁𝗿𝗲, who doesn't live too far from here, as a choreographer, because she's a great storyteller with dance, but she also finds humor in dance, which is awesome, because theater and dance can take themselves a little seriously sometimes, and so it's nice to find that humor. But yeah, I think that magic, dance is magic to me. I'm not a dancer, I'm not a choreographer, but I've hired a lot of them. So I think I will continue to do that.
And uniquely, last year's show at 𝗦𝘁𝗿𝗲, it was classical Indian dance? Was
Yeah,
that right? So it was also intercultural in that way too.
Yeah, that was like very exciting and something new to try. I don't know if it was successful, but I loved it. And the dancers, those dancers are world-class dancers, but they were so thrilled to be working in something that wasn't just very specifically in one of just to their people, like they were great to share with everyone how amazing they are as dancers and storytellers. So that was a really special opportunity. Yeah,
it was beautiful. It was a really beautiful production. And that leads me to my next question around, I think in one of the recent interviews as well, Yvette, you mentioned how this play examines these questions of identity that are, like you mentioned, great questions to raise within a sovereign space, to have within community, but that the specificity of that also lends itself because, like you mentioned, these questions of identity apply to so many folks across equity-deserving communities or marginalized communities. And I wanted to talk about how the intercultural exploration is embedded in your work as artists in this day and age.
Everything is intercultural.
I understand, yes.
Because,
yes,
of course, I keep talking about Native Earth, but that's because I did a big bunch of learning at Native Earth when I ran it. That was Canada's oldest professional Indigenous theatre company, but we were all from different nations, so it was already intercultural. Like we made Death of a Chief, which was an adaptation of Julius Caesar, an all-Indigenous adaptation of Julius Caesar. And so we had to make a Rome, Ontario, and then there was like every kind of Indigenous, Monique Mojica and Janny Lozon and Michelle St. John and Michaela Washburn. All of these people were different, like Cree, Rappahannock, Kuna. So we had to come to some kind of agreement about how we were going to work together interculturally. Then when we do work across culture, which we often do, any play you see that has a cast, I'm hoping it's diverse this day and age, 𝗦𝘁𝗿𝗲. I'm hoping that it's not just like, how could it be all the same sort of people? So I think we have to assume that we're always working across culture. And whenever we come into the room to do the work, we bring our ancestors with us. So we bring our histories with us. We bring our, my parents, my dad came from Ireland, my mom came from 𝗬𝗏𝗄𝗏, Quebec. All those histories, all those ancestors come into the room with me and they meet everybody else's ancestors. And then we decide how we're going to work together, what values we're going to work together on. So it's less of a question for me because it feels like I've been working interculturally. I've had an awareness of intercultural work for a long time. And I guess I have to be careful that it doesn't slip into an assumption that everybody else understands that we're all working interculturally. You are coming to see this play by this Métis playwright in this space that has been at times very not diverse. And over the last decade or so has become I'm looking at you, Jeff Ho, at Mike Payette, the artistic director here. It's like we're starting to reflect on our stages what our lives actually look like out in the world, which is great. And those are the conversations we should be having as Canadians.
Yeah, and I think talking with someone like Michael Rubenfeld, who is a Canadian artist and producer, lives in Poland now, he's very clear that these sorts of stories that are kind of uniquely Canadian are what the rest of the world is interested in. Shockingly, they don't want to see our Shakespeare, or our Shaw, and so that's hopeful for me. That it's that first we need to start and create work for our communities with our communities. Like that's still. I mean, Edmonton doesn't have a native earth, so the lack of diversity there is still a real problem. And there's a reason why we're doing this show that features, I think, 3 Edmonton leads, first in Toronto, and we'll be bringing it to Edmonton. But strangely enough, Toronto is the safer spot to start, wow. Which you'd never think, typically, because it's such a theater mecca. But yeah, I think that it's exciting to think where our stories, our intercultural stories, as we build them in Canada, can reach, because I think the world is hopefully hungry for that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both. And that's exactly it, is the offer of the work as you come in and you're an intercultural audience meeting this work as well, and that hopefully the questions raised in it reflect upon your own lives or offers space for you to have questions of your own life. Before I open it up for some audience questions, I wanted to ask one last thing around healing. The ending of the play does offer us the threads of healing or a way forward, and also from the program, you both mentioned the reality of how the world we live in and share in feel at times heavy, feels at times dark, and I wanted to ask, what are your personal hopes and moments of healing that you hope for in the future as humans and artists?
For me, and I talk about it in my book, Medicine Shows, healing is, unhealing is about disconnection. So when we talk about in Indigenous communities being broken or being unhealthy, it's because there's disconnection. We've become disconnected from healthy food choices, from healthy water, from our communities, from the land. And so for me, healing is about reconnection. So it's reconnection to the land, reconnection to our people, reconnection to the larger community. So it's, and that's the only way I can think about it, because otherwise, like 500 years of colonization just is too much to bear. Mm-hmm. So I'd rather think about how do we reconnect both in our communities and then outwards to the larger communities, because we are 𝗦𝘁𝗿𝗄, we are all connected, we are all related on this land. That to me is healing.
Yeah, I think that everywhere you look right now, people are damning people. Everyone's being damned or damning someone, and it's really tiresome. And I hope with this play that no one in the end is damned. Mm-hmm. That maybe people walk different paths by the end of the play, but that we don't have someone we've stoned and someone we've put on a pedestal, that everyone walks out as fully fledged human beings. So yeah, I think that's healing in a way right now, oddly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to open it up for some questions from the audience. Or any comments? Yes. Hi, Anne.
I have a question, and I hope it doesn't reflect too much on my ignorance, but I'm really interested in what you were saying about knowledge keepers. And then I wondered, well, what is like you did describe, the relationship of being an artist in relation to the knowledge keepers and those long lines of traditional knowledge that's passed on. But do you also consider yourselves as artists and knowledge keepers? Because, or what is the difference between an artist and a knowledge keeper?
Well, I mean, from my understanding, from my elders, I would not identify as a knowledge keeper, and I would probably never identify as a knowledge keeper. But I definitely know artists like 𝗦𝗁𝗿𝗍, who we work with, who is an incredible artist and a knowledge keeper. So I think that is possible. I think you might get a different response from any person you ask, but I think that sometimes that has to do with your experience with community, the community you lived with, how you were brought up, the positions of leadership that you've occupied. I run a company, but my company is producing my plays. My company's not Native Earth. I can't speak in an expansive way about Indigenous theater in the country for several decades the way Yvette can. But I think that, it's tricky because it's also in a place like Toronto, you don't run into as many Indigenous people as you do in a place like Edmonton. There are lots of Indigenous people, of course, here, but it's much more prevalent or in your face, I guess, in Edmonton. And so I think that conversation changes whether you're in Toronto or Montreal or in Saskatoon or Edmonton. And so, I think I have to be very careful in a position also as a professor, assistant professor, where I definitely have students and Indigenous students who are connecting to their culture for the first time. And I can tell they really want the answers. And have to be very careful to say, okay, well, this is what I've learned or what I've been told. That's not necessarily an answer for you. And I'm definitely not someone to ask for this knowledge or someone to give you advice on how to, pursue that experience. So try to be very cautious. And I think I've been very lucky to work with elders and mentors who are incredibly humble. And so someone like Jerry Saddleback could take up a lot of space. Like he would be unreachable probably if he was like that. But he's always, available when he's available in an incredible way. And I'm lucky to have it.
One of my elders says that and I've sat in circle with her, with a bunch of other elders in the circle. And she says, well, Yvette, the elder doesn't hold the knowledge. The elder holds the circle, and the circle holds the knowledge. And that, I think, is also a way, it's a big teaching for me, and it's a way of working in the room in a way that makes us more collaborative, more work in circle, because we all bring everything, all of our teachings to the room, and then we negotiate how we're going to do the work. So the circle holds the knowledge. That makes it a lot easier. And that also leads to like all of this is true at once, because I listen to that knowledge keeper say something and this one goes, oh yeah, we have that story too, only it goes like this. And then this one goes, oh yeah, we have that story too, only it goes like this. And everybody nods and nods like all of this is true at once. All of this, the way we tell that story is true. That was lots of big teachings for me sitting in those circles.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. Joe, yeah.
I took a Canadian Lit course many years ago, so I remember that one of the books, the core book that we had to focus on was Margaret Atwood's Survival. I don't know if you know the text or not, so I guess my question for you, is this she talked about the underlying theme of survival in Canadian literature at that particular time, which is very different from, but in both of your works, as artists and in Strife, does the theme of survival run through the play as a whole? I'm hoping that's I've made that clear. I'm sitting there, how can I word this question to you both?
I think of the unplugging.
That's great. That's I'm kind of an apocalyptist. I don't actually believe that we in the world. So I have to keep writing about like post-apocalyptic moments where we have survived. But also Indigenous population, there's a thing called survivance, which is survival and resistance put together because we're still here. In spite of 500 years of colonization, in spite of smallpox and everything. For me, certainly survival is a thing. It's great that you bring Atwood into it. She was a huge influence on me. the early reading, because yeah, and that's such an interesting thing I think it is a base note in Strife, survival and survivance.
Survival and survival.
Yeah, and it makes me think of culture and reclaiming or protecting culture. I think in Bears and in Strife, there are people who have been removed for whatever reason from their own, sometimes their own land or their own culture, and they're working in different ways to come back to it. And in Bears, he sort of has, the character at the end of the story has kind of found his way back to culture, and then he sort of loses his life, but in a way that's, I don't want to say irrelevant, but that coming back to the culture is the big survival move. So I need to think about it that way. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Yes.
I would like to ask an insight kind of question. When you write, do you write to mimic reality and primarily, and then do you add imaginative things to make a point funny or more convincing or humor, just to emphasize a point?
I think that I got obsessed when I was first writing my first play, 𝗬𝗂. I was trying to write as real as I possibly could. I rewrote one scene like 300 times, and it actually got cut from the show. And that was a good lesson. So I definitely, with a show like Strife, Bears is not realism, but a show like Strife, certain elements of it for sure, I try to get as real as I can. But I've tried, and I'm still trying to be less precious, because when you bring in a director's vision, when you bring in the amazing talent of your collaborators and actors, they can bring amazing things that you never would have considered. And if you've gotten too rigid an idea of how things should be, from a comma to certain other things, then that can be pretty inhibiting. But that's still something I'm working actively on. And so, yeah, I try for realism, but try not to be too precious. Yeah.
How about for you, Yvette, in your writing?
Oh, well, I've been doing it a long time, so I've become less and less realistic about things. But also, the more I write, the more, if I get started, I write to work out something, a problem. I have a question, I have a problem, I need to work it out. And that's why I start writing a play. And then once I've got the characters talking, at some point they start taking over and they start writing. And then I have very little control over they have voices and they start to speak, and I don't have to make them funny. They get funny by themselves. Fortunately.
Thank you so much. Please join me in congratulating our team. Have a really, really wonderful time at the show tonight. Can't wait to see you at the next one. And I'm amazed that the sun is still out. It's truly the first talk of the year.